confident, courageous, and very outspoken. Jupiter in Aries invites us to partake in a whole new, wild, and exciting adventure. It's time that we celebrate our gorgeous friend Jupiter in Aries. This is a transit that's coming in quick. It begins on May 10th, 2022, and it will last roughly a year until May 16th, 2023. We do have a short regress back into Pisces toward the end of the year. That's going to be from October 28th through December 20th. So overall, we get a solid 10 months of Jupiter in Aries. So what can we expect now that Jupiter is exiting the sign of its domicile in Pisces and entering into the fire sign Aries? Well, number one, I want to address a concern that a lot of people might be having. What's going to happen when Jupiter leaves its domicile? We love a domicile planet. You know, Jupiter's been at home in Pisces, bringing us all kinds of soulful expansion, helping us sort of bounce back, many of us, after a pretty terrible time. And Jupiter in Pisces has helped us find a sense of hopefulness and optimism about life moving forward. It's also helped us connect with our soul's purpose in the way that we sort of put the pieces of our life back together. Like, what is really meaningful to me? What does living a life that is meaningful look like for me now after the pandemic? A lot of people might be thinking about Jupiter moving into Aries and feeling a little nervous, but I want to tell you, there is no need, because Jupiter is actually very comfortable in the sign of Aries. So, according to Essential Dignity, Jupiter holds triplicity in the fire signs. Jupiter is actually considered a planet that rules over the fire element. So in that regard, Jupiter is quite cozy in the home of its relatives, basically, like staying with friends, like staying with really good friends in the sign of Aries. So in other words, Jupiter is still incredibly well resourced in this sign. And why? Well, I mean, Jupiter does rule another fire sign, Sagittarius. So it makes sense that Jupiter is very comfortable here in this sign. We know that Jupiter is a planet that deals with good luck, expansion, discovery. And what better to have those things in the sign of Aries, which is a trailblazing sign, a sign that is brave and courageous and excited to see what's over that cliffside, excited to see what's on the other side of that mountain. So Jupiter can do a lot of discovering here in this sign. So some of the themes that we're going to be seeing here, I think, are outspokenness. We live in a climate, especially where I live here in the United States, where things are incredibly polarized right now. We have like a very extreme, let's just say politically, things have swung in very extreme directions. I think Jupiter in Aries, we can expect Jupiter in Aries to bring more brazen level of rogue ideas and beliefs that we'll be hearing about. I think being fiercely independent in the sign of Aries, we're going to see less loyalty to a political affiliation or party. I think we're going to see more people sort of willing to put their beliefs and their ideas out on the table without really worrying too much about what people think. Like, there's a fearlessness to this quality that Jupiter in Aries has. So I think we're going to see bold statements and also bold judgments. So Jupiter does have a great deal of affiliation with the law. And the interesting thing about this is that as Jupiter enters Aries, it's going to be sitting at the cardinal point, the world axis. So that 0 degrees, that first degree of Aries is world axis point. It's going to get up to 8 degrees of Aries toward the end of July. Let's see here. I have the date right here. July 28th, Jupiter is going to station retrograde and at 8 degrees Aries. So that means it's going to hit that cardinal point again just before it retrogrades back into Pisces at the end of 2022. And when it comes back, it's going to hit that cardinal point again. This means that we are going to see some judgments, some pretty big ones that make waves, not just here in the States. This is probably going to be everywhere, but here in the United States, we're already seeing some pretty important and pretty rogue, actually, like legislature on the table. I mean, even as I'm recording this, there is this significant case between Johnny Depp and ex-wife Amber Heard on the character defamation case. And it's making some pretty big waves. Like, it's making larger headlines than I think anyone anticipated. And the timing of this trial seems like it might sort of wrap up when Jupiter is at that 0 degrees point of Aries. And so there will be major court decisions. And that can be like exciting, this is a fire sign, but it can also be, I'm also a little nervous about it, to be frank. If you've been following my channel, my political views aren't secret. And some people have issues with astrologers taking sides. I mean, I strive to look at things from both angles and try to make objective statements about what could happen. But my views are no secret. So I will say that I am a little nervous. There are some threats to Roe v. Wade and medical freedom for uterus having people with that statement or with that placement there. It does make me nervous. There's also a lot of anti-trans legislation and oppressive legislation toward people who are not straight, basically. Like, we're seeing what's happening in Florida with the Don't Say Gay bills. So, I mean, another big one, and this one's pretty neutral, is the daylight savings one. Like, we're thinking about getting rid of it altogether or keeping it altogether, one of the two. So I do expect there to be some pretty landmark decisions with this legislation, or the topic of judges in general. There's the Democratic push to add more seats to the Supreme Court. So I do think with Jupiter spending a total of, I think, 26 days total, I think that's what I counted up, with Jupiter on the world axis. I mean, that's a lot. So I think we can expect to see some important developments there. Another very interesting layer to this is the fact that Jupiter is ruled by Mars. And where it gets interesting, so Jupiter in Aries is ruled by Mars. Let me rephrase that. The interesting thing about this is that Mars is going to be stationing retrograde in Gemini. And that is happening around the same time that Jupiter retrogrades back into Pisces. Nonetheless, so I think that end of October will be very significant. There's going to be some sort of pulling back in a way from everything that basically we're going to see that Jupiter and Aries brings out. There's going to be like a backtracking, like Mars, the sword goes back into the sheath. Like it's not going to be as cutthroat there for a couple months, like between like pretty much the month of November and December. I think we can expect things to tone down a little bit in terms of animosity and whatever else this is raising in terms of divisiveness. But so the thing is that Mars will be spending a considerable time in the sign of Gemini due to retrograde. So out of the 10 months that Jupiter spends in the sign of Aries, 6 of those months, Mars and Gemini will be ruling it. That's a pretty big percentage. And so we can think about the influence of Mars and Gemini on Jupiter in Aries. So I think one of the things that is going to be really significant is the banning of books. This is something that is rooted from personal beliefs that people want to bring into the legislature. And so we're going to see the banning of books and that topic in general being a really big theme. Also, the theme of things that are happening in schools. I mean, a lot of these laws, like the thing about the legislature on Don't Say Gay, that's pertaining to schools. So I think that we're going to see some significant developments there. Also, just thinking about, I don't know, what's coming to mind is maybe some independent study too. There's people who would feel safer studying from home. I think there is a considerable emphasis on the air element. We're in an air era. So I think we will be seeing some developments in education long term. So what about debt forgiveness? Could that be something? We're sort of returning to that conversation right now. One of the things that slipped my mind that I wanted to go back to momentarily was the outspokenness. And I've just noticed a lot of people being hesitant in their organic commentary, especially on social media platforms where there's been sort of this bandwagon bandwagon attacking of people, and people like cancel culture, and people having hesitance to post things that could be super benign, but they're just worried about how that could be interpreted. And so people have been extra careful about what they're saying and feeling like they have to do all these qualifying tweets to follow things up. And I think Jupiter in Aries is going to help people sort of come out of that. It's been important work that we've been doing collectively to become more conscientious of some of the statements and re-educating ourselves and stuff like that. But I think Jupiter in Aries will help bring a certain level of impulsiveness back into our sharing. And maybe some of that will be refreshing, and maybe some of it won't be. Maybe some of it will ultimately be controversial. I think that Jupiter in Aries will bring a lot of controversy because people aren't going to be afraid to put their opinions out there. People are just not caring anymore or caring much less. One of the other themes I think we can see is an emphasis on weapons and warfare. Now, I want to qualify that. I'm not trying to make a fearful statement here. I'm not trying to predict violence. I'm not trying to predict that. But what I am saying is that there is a big conflict that is still going on between Ukraine and Russia. Mostly war crimes against Ukraine. Let's get the facts straight. But developments in warfare, and especially linking back to Mars and Gemini, like technology and drones and data. And I think we are living in a new era of technological warfare where we've basically sanctioned Russia by cutting them off to a lot of online resources and basically that sense of connection with the rest of the world through technology. And so I think that is a tactic of the air era. We're moving out of an earth era where, there's a lot of emphasis on acquisition for the last 200 years of property, of land, of gold, of materials. And there was just an emphasis on collecting and owning and hoarding. Moving into the air element, we're going to see more of a movement of people, more dispersing, more emphasis on education, but also technology. So, and invention. Invention is another pretty big one. So seeing this, and what's happening in the world, and seeing new strategies for warfare develop, I think that will be significant. Jupiter is expanding. Jupiter is expanding our awareness of Aries, and Aries is ruled by Mars, which deals with battle and conflict. But yeah, in general, I think just another thing that sort of comes to mind is avatars. This whole thing with Facebook and metaverse, it weirds me out. It really does. I finally just deleted my Facebook because I don't want to be I haven't used it in years, but I just don't want to be in that virtual universe. I just don't. So I was just thinking that was one. Another big one that kind of bridges legislature and weapons is, access to guns. I just saw an unsettling statistic that said that the number one killer of children, it used to be motor vehicles. It's been replaced by weapons. It's been replaced by guns. And we are in an age here in the States where school shootings have been and like I want to say endemic, like my pretty much my whole adult life. And yeah, like it's like we're not seeing enough efforts to kind of curb that. Like here where I live in Ohio, they actually just made it easier to obtain a weapon. They got rid of an 8-hour training and background checks. And so they've made it easier to obtain a weapon. But I think we're going to see that become a bigger topic here in while Jupiter is in Aries. I want to highlight a couple key dates with Jupiter in Aries. The first one is going to be, let's see here, May 29th. May 29th is when Mars is in Aries and Jupiter is in Aries, and they meet up, and the two are sort of gassing each other up. So if there is a point in Jupiter in Aries where I would be a little bit nervous about, something like that pertaining to like attacks or weaponry or anything like that, it would be around that time, because they're like Mars is incredibly passionate, but also swift and impulsive. And Jupiter is just saying, yes, do more, Mars, like sort of gassing up Mars. Meanwhile, I think like that's just like a recipe for bold incentive motivated by belief. So that could also be in our personal life, like something that really encourages us to make a big, bold, courageous act, whether it's finally leaving the job or finally standing up to so and so, whatever it might be, finally launching your website, finally sharing something that you've been sort of holding back and being secretive about, like in private, like whether maybe it's an astrology practice, you know what I mean? Like whatever it is that you've sort of been like working behind the scenes and wanting to do, this could be the big, bold push to bring it out into the open. So there's good things that can come out of that too. It's just sort of unsettling when there are like, just to be real, I'm not fear mongering here, but there are like threats of nuclear attacks and stuff like that going on right now. And so that does make me nervous. But I'm not saying that it would happen. I'm just saying that it makes me nervous. Another key date that's really important is that one that I already sort of mentioned at the end of October 2022. And we see Jupiter moving back into Pisces on the 28th, which means that Jupiter then answers unto itself. At the same time, Mars is stationing retrograde. And on October 25th, we have a solar eclipse at 2 degrees Scorpio. This will be activating Putin's chart. This will be activating Biden's chart. And so, that's going to be opposite Biden's 6th house moon. So and that's going to be on Biden's ascendant. So according to the chart data that we do have for him, we're not quite certain how exact that is, although the eclipses are really activating his chart in that way. So it's still from here, it's still kind of unclear how that will play out. There are some significant things developing on that front as I'm recording during eclipse season. Likely on the other side of this spring eclipse season, we'll have a clearer picture for what that end of October will bring. But for right now, it's just very notable. There's a lot happening there at the end of October. So that definitely insinuates that there will be some important reversals or backtracks or pullbacks or significant developments in that regard. We'll just kind of have to wait and see. But until then, Jupiter is activating a new part of your chart. So if you want to connect on how that is bringing in new opportunities and like a new sense of abundance to a new focus in your chart, definitely feel free to connect with me for your next astrology reading. We can certainly talk about that. If it's your Jupiter return, check out my Jupiter return video here on YouTube, and probably wearing the same shirt. This is like my Jupiter shirt. It looks like Jupiter to me. I happen to be having my Jupiter return, so I'm pretty thrilled about that. And if you want to know more, you can check out my article, which goes into a little bit more detail on this transit on my website. And until then, that was your extended, long-winded Jupiter and Aries astrology shot of the day. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in with me today. For more astrology in your world, connect with me on all platforms at Astro Catherine. You can also visit me at my website where you can get on my mailing list and stay up to date on all the current offerings and classes that are going on. Till then, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to connecting with you. Bye.